All right, babies. This one's a bit interesting. I'm going to reference a few people while thinking about it. Today, the truth constantly fluctuates under subjective observation. Now, who here is familiar with the double-slit experiment? The idea behind this is basically that they project light through a split and it kind of like shows across the actual pages, the stages. And what ends up happening is basically they follow, I think, the photons of light or something, or photons, some kind of particle. They follow them in each direction. And what happens is basically they kind of like, they go through the split experiment and they go to different places. And the idea, the simple format is like, the results of the experiment are one thing, but when they're looking at the experiment, it gives a different result. And so the thought is the results change after they're being observed. The experiment where the results change after being observed. Now, there was an interview once with Neil deGrasse Tyson around this experiment. And they were asking them, so it's called the observer effect. It is the double-slit experiment, which demonstrates the act of observing quantum system changes its behavior. When particles like electrons are not observed, they create an interference pattern, but when observed, they behave like particles, resulting in a different outcome. When they had this conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson, he very much pointed at something that is brilliant. And he said, our eye's main job, main job of the eye, is to basically reflect light, to absorb light, and to kind of like, the more it absorbs light, which is being reflected by other shit, we reflect as well light, and the eyes reflect light. But ultimately, we're kind of like projecting the same kind of like shit that's being reflected at us. And what we do is we absorb that light in order for us to be able to see. So once we're looking at something as kind of like light, as an electron/photon, when we're looking at them through the experiment, we are interfering with their passageways simply because the nature of our eye is based on the fact that it actually like absorbs and reflects light. So we're looking at a light experiment and our eyes do that thing. In order for us to see the experiment, we have to reflect a bit of light towards that direction, which ends up changing the experiment's value itself. So it's called the observer effect, where basically once you observe, you disturb the system by the act of observation itself. Now, we could stop there, naturally, but for me, it's like I kind of was like, how does that affect our basically reality? And so it took me back to the concept of consciousness and how consciousness explored itself. And how did it do that? Basically, the consciousness was conscious, and it was like, okay, I exist, or whatever consciousness was, I'm conscious. Then it was like, holy shit, I am conscious. And in order to realize that, it had to kind of detach from itself and realize that it's conscious, right? It was like, oh, consciousness, I am conscious. Isn't that what we do? We kind of go like, no. I noticed that I am conscious. Like, how did I notice? I got out of myself. And in order to get out of myself, to notice that, I kind of created that relationship between me and myself. And then suddenly you're like, that relationship impacts you. And then the way you are conscious changes. The way you exist changes. The way you think, you perceive yourself changes. And because of that difference in perception, you change. Right? Because you express yourself differently, because you're perceived differently. And that impacts the relationship between you and yourself, which changes your perception, and thus that's how things grow. That's how things expand, elaborate, expound, and all that beautiful shit that kind of happens with us when we're kind of exploring. So it came to me, and the thought process is the truth constantly fluctuates under subjective observation. When you're observing something, you're either observing it as it is or observing it as you see it. And if you're observing it as you see it, it's a subjective thing. If you're observing it as it is, then it's an objective thing. If I'm just looking at the book, I used that expression 4 videos ago, where I was like, you can look at a tree, and a lot of people can't differentiate between the different trees, even though they kind of like have different leaves. But for them, all it is a tree. They only see leaves and branches, and that basically like swaying in the wind. But then basically, some people can see a lot more detail around it. But also some people see a lot more of its existence within the realm of a forest, because the tree absorbs oxygen and absorbs carbon dioxide, or extracts carbon dioxide from the actual atmosphere and absorbs it, allows oxygen to flow. We absorb the oxygen. So when we absorb the oxygen, the blood takes it, because that's why we have iron in our blood. That's why our blood is dark. So that's what happens. And then as it happens, it kind of like extracts the oxygen, takes them to the cells, uses the oxygen to call for the carbon that the cells are excreting, and then brings them back to our lungs, and we go, right? It does the same thing. That's why when you're hyperventilating, when you inhale and exhale way too much, your brain kind of feels like it's dizzy, because it's way too much oxygen that it's used to. The same thing, the carbon in the trees turns into wood, and it grows, so the tree kind of grows from its atmosphere. And the idea is that's objectively observing the world, not necessarily putting yourself in what I'm looking at. There's no feeling behind it. There's no your personal feeling behind it. But if I'm looking at a tree and there's a personal feeling behind it, then there's a reference point between me and the tree. And then ultimately the tree consistently is changing. Every time it moves, it's a different shape. It's no longer just a tree. It's my tree, right? It's a tree that has a piece of me interacting with it, that represents something about me. I'm talking about when I'm actually involving a feeling I have towards that thing. So whatever the thing is that you're looking at, it's constantly moving, because that's how it is. But then like it is constantly moving also because of who you are, as you're subjectively observing it, the shape it has constantly changes, and it's never all the way up and never left or right or back and forth, right? Like the 3 dimensions. It could be any of those. For example, I have the guitar, and when I'm practicing the guitar, like it changes differently than when I'm not practicing. When I'm not practicing the guitar, there's a sense of melancholy anytime I see it. And what I end up doing is playing with the strings and going like, oh, I remember that sound, and it's been a while, and then I continue with my day. Whilst when I'm actually playing the guitar, it's like, oh, this song listens to this and goes to that, and it's just like my mind kind of does different things around it. So imagine when you're looking at the truth subjectively, right? When you're looking at the truth from how you see it, how you are involved in it. That's basically the subjectivity behind your existence. Like, I exist, so I touch things. I impose my will on things. I create things, which means I'm kind of like producing, expressing something into this world, manifesting something into this world. And so when the truth constantly fluctuates under subjective observation, means as long as you're looking at something and a piece of you is kind of like included in that observation, what happens is whatever you see as the truth keeps changing. And I feel that's maybe the origin of thought, because thought is triggered based on what we look at or what we're observing and what we see. And the more we exchange with this life, the more we exchange with whatever life has to give us, I guess, whatever the conditions that life brings upon us, whatever the considerations that we have to kind of like keep in mind anytime we bring something closer or further, or push something further away from us. All of these are very much how we are involved more than it is how they are involved. I feel it's only natural to start from us and to extend. And that constantly, when I say fluctuates, is because when you're looking at something subjectively, what mood are you in? How are you feeling? What has triggered those feelings? How does the world look like at that moment for things to kind of like express themselves a certain kind of way? And why, that's basically like, again, like I'm using my own subjective lens to observe, right? So the truth is going to change based on what lens I'm using, and this lens is very much influenced by feelings, emotions, moods, triggers, small environments, right? All of these things kind of like influence. Our strength as humans, or our evolution to human from human being, should be a certain growth or expression beyond having everything impact us. Like, I only want me to be the one that sees things. But that also has a lot of subjectivity, because like, who am I and what am I, and all these things that are connected to each other. So whatever you say is the truth one day could be not the truth the next, and simply because the truth constantly fluctuates under subjective observation. The more you look at something, the more it shifts, adjusts, and changes based on how you shift, adjust, and change. How do we find that balance? I don't know. I feel what I do is anytime I feel like I have an opinion on something, I realize that if I have an opinion on it, then I'm doing something wrong. So I start asking more questions as to why I have that opinion, more than what it is that I actually have an opinion of. And once I figure that part out, the minute I actually look, it's a different subjective approach. It's a different approach. The minute I look at something again, the opinion kind of is either gone or just is left behind. Because I can see why I had the opinion, but then again, I get to see exactly what it is that I'm looking at without me interfering and having an opinion around it. I love you guys. Yeah.